Welcome to Wise Up on Air. All right, how about that new intro video? You have arrived just on time to catch the latest episode of Wise Up on Air. Huge shout out to the team putting together that introduction, kicking off Wise Up on Air in just the right way. And thanks to folks who are out there tuned in already. Looking forward to chatting with you today. So let's run it down. What are we going to talk about in this episode? Well, first of all, we've got some super special guests primed and ready to go deep on space-age sound systems in Wise, and we'll dig a bit deeper in things with them here in a minute. But first I want to cover some Audiokinetic news, new things coming soon and here today. We're going to talk about the 23.1 beta. We're going to talk about Strata, the multi-track sound library, new and future collections. Audiokinetic out in the community, maybe even near you. And then we're going to shine the spotlight on some folks in the community doing some cool things with Wise. So thanks for joining us today. Let's jump in. So first off, we've been hard at work on the next full release of Wise, the 2023.1, coming later this year. But first, we're going to get the beta out to you so that you can get your hands on all of these new features that we've been working on, landing squarely in your workflow. So that's going to be coming soon. Keep them peeled, keep them tuned in to Audiokinetic across all of the different ways that we're out there communicating with you, and be the first to put your hands on some of the cool new things. We'll be out there in front with a live stream discussing those features, so looking forward to having your feedback helping to drive the development of this tool set that we use to create interactive audio experiences. So keep them peeled. Strata. We launched the new multi-track library from Audiokinetic last fall, and over the last few months have been adding collection after collection. We've got 29 different sound collections out there for subscribers who have jumped in and taken this multi-track sound library into their workflows as part of their process. And if you haven't already, you can jump in and get this free Strata sample pack, which has a bunch of different sounds culled from these various collections. It puts them right into your workflow, creating sounds for all kinds of media with a free licensing structure for use across all of your different applications. So jump in if you haven't already, because it's all within reach for you to design using these multi-track libraries prepared in Reaper. Really dig into the way they've been designed by the folks at Boom Library, including their effects processing chains, and just that in itself is a masterclass in sound design in this multi-track format. So we hope you can jump in and give that a try. It's as easy as stepping over to audiokinetic.com and going to the Strata product page. You can get walked through on how to get those free samples directly to you. Additionally, we've got a second sample pack slated for release later this month in June. So that's going to be another great opportunity and another great collection of sounds that you can use across your different projects. And that is followed by additional collections that we're releasing every month, leading up to a giant physics collection in August. And that's near and dear to my heart, and especially this episode where we're going to dig deeper into the sound of space and physics. So yeah, stay tuned. There's a ton of great collections coming, new partner collections in the works, and we're really excited to have you on board. That sample 2 that will be coming out later here in June is going to include parts of the sci-fi weapons collection, Footsteps, modern firearms and bullets. So you'll be able to leverage all of that, dig into the multi-track, and again, using Reaper and our new Wwise extension, get that quickly into Wise in a format that you can get to work designing on the interactive side of things with Wise. So great to have you in there giving those a try and really seeing the value of what sample library in multi-track brings to your workflow. Stay up to date with the latest Strata news. If you want to sign up as part of your Audiokinetic account to get the Strata newsletter, you'll be the first to know when the new collections are released, including that sample collection number 2 coming here in June. Good to see some folks in the chat. Thanks for joining us today. And yeah, I love what's happening there. Keep us posted as we flow through if you have questions. It's just great to have the community out today talking about Wise. And speaking of out in the community talking about Wise, we have a few different conferences coming up over the next few months that we'll be participating in. There's the DevGam later in June, where Matthes Moretti will be talking about object-based audio. Develop coming up. While we're not speaking, we will have head of product Simon Ashby on the ground, talking with the community, catching the vibe of interactive audio there at Develop. So definitely, if you're there, give Simon a shout out. And then later this fall, we'll be landing at Game SoundCon again, October 17th and 18th at the new location in Burbank, where again, we'll have an entire room devoted to Wise education and really just kind of getting in touch with what Wise has to offer for interactive audio solutions. So ton of great guests, ton of great speakers, topics, and we hope to see y'all in October at Game SoundCon. And with that, I wanted to talk a little bit about a few different things that I've come across over the past months out there in the community happening. We'll take a quick look at a skate sim using Wise, some music callbacks prototype, and a great developer walkthrough for Moss Book 2. So let's go.
Of these 2, or maybe even 4 altogether, but I've just kept it for 2 for the sake of this just now. So if we play...
Okay, so without context, this is a skate sim prototype that someone has created out there in Wise, and they're going to walk us through one of the components of this skate sim that is focused on the rolling sounds that leverages velocity from the game. So let's hear a little bit more about this from Aaron.
So when player velocity is at its highest, you're only getting the fastest of the sounds. And when that comes right down, I've got it down to roughly 75. You start to hear the slow sound taking in just a little bit, and it'll get gradually swap over until we get all the way down to the bottom 10. There, we'll only hear the slow sound. Now, there are a couple of ways you could chop this up, and arguably you could have another sort of medium pace in the middle of these two, or maybe even 4 altogether, but I've just kept it for 2 for the sake of this just now. So, if we play this, we should hear that coming through, and let's just go down here. So as velocity decreases, we'll blend into our slower one. Hear that one is. Cool. That was the thinking behind that. And as I say, you could add.
Yeah, and so that's just a real simple example of one of the components there that has been integrated by Aaron Richards for the envisioned skateboarding system. So focusing specifically on the rolling sounds, using a velocity parameter and a blend track crossfading between different sample sets based on velocity. So super cool illustration, and I love coming across stuff like that out in the community where people are imagining these systems of sound playback dynamically and interactively using Wwise. So thanks, Aaron, for putting that out there to the world. The next one I wanted to talk about was the idea of getting callbacks on music chords, harmonizing sound effects in real time made with Wwise and Unity from Antonin. It's such a simple example, again, where they're pulling in custom cues from the music system in order to inform sounds and music, as well as bringing that visualization to the interface in Unity. So let's take a look at that.
Is the mayor of Lonely Town, population 1, population 1, staring a hole in the ground, staring at the sun, oh, in the garden to feel.
So again, a deeper dive on it in the thread for this that I'm dropping in the chat, but just a great example of how you can bring information back from, in this case, the music system, and use that to drive both the sound side of things as well as the visuals in the game as well. So dig into that a little bit deeper if you can. And lastly, I just wanted to land with this clip from a recent developer walkthrough that Polyarc Games did for Moss Book 2, because again, just some incredible work being done out there in the community.
Steven did this amazing job. So like when you get the different reader abilities, one of them is being able to like paint on the vines onto the wall, like we just saw back there. And all of that is like dynamic based off of like how long are you painting, and he did this amazing job because it's kind of tied to sprite magic from Moss 1, and a lot of the sprite magic was built out of like frogs processed through granular synthesis techniques.
Oh wow.
And it just sounds like Steven did such an amazing job on that stuff. It sounds so good.
Cool. And so that's Kristen Quebe from Polyarc talking about, dynamic sounds using Wwise, and again, the crossover between some pretty cool sounding work done by Stephen Hoddy in that game. So great stuff there. I'm going to drop the link for that video into the chat as well. Definitely worth diving into. So great to have a place where we can call out the community and the cool work they're doing out there with Wwise. So thanks again to folks who are out there advocating for interactive audio dynamics and leveraging those dynamics in a way that that they're sharing out there in the community. So we're all growing and learning together, and great to have your contributions to that. So, leading quickly into today's topic of space age sound systems with Wwise, I want to welcome to the live stream the team at Blackbird Interactive. Hey.
Hello.
Hi.
How's it going?
Hello.
It's fantastic. Great to see you. Great to hear you. And you got some friends back there with you.
Yeah, we got some little bunnies.
Excellent.
If anyone's played Shipbreaker and got kind of far in it, they might have encountered those guys.
Great. Can't wait to hear more about those. But first, let's get some introductions out. Would you take the time to introduce yourself and your team?
For sure. So my name is Ben. I'm audio director here at Blackbird, working most recently on the Hardspace Shipbreaker. And I'll hand over to Luke.
Yeah, I'm Luke. I'm a senior sound designer here, and I joined Blackbird to work on Shipbreaker after Ben had kind of set up some really cool systems that we're going to talk about today.
Yeah, I'm Carl Matthes, also sound designer here at Blackbird Interactive, of course. And I joined after Luke, so it's been fast. And I came in the last part of the project, so I was really excited to join. Original from Venezuela, moved to Argentina, now in Canada.
Excellent. Right, you're all in Vancouver.
Yep.
Come together to work on this project. And for folks who haven't heard about Hardspace Shipbreaker yet, give us the setup. What are we doing in this game?
Yeah. So in this game, it's kind of in the future, maybe a few hundred years in the future, and you work for you're just like a random guy who lands a job working for or gal. We don't know. Like you are the player. You are the hero of the game. And yeah, you work for a gigantic mega corporation, and the mega corporation is in charge of decommissioning massive industrial spaceships. So they bring them to you to break them down into the component parts to make profit, essentially. So it's kind of like a job sim, but it's like a kind of future job sim in space. And the job is like highly dangerous. These ships are like stuffed with really volatile systems. There's electrical systems, there's fuel systems, there's all sorts of stuff that can go horribly wrong or horribly right, depending on how you're playing the game. You're equipped with a grapple tool and a cutting tool, and with those two bits of equipment, you can kind of slice and dice the ships that you encounter. And break them down into the component parts. So it's a really simple concept, but the execution of it was just incredibly deep, and because it's a very physics-based gameplay, everything is a physics simulation, really. That really tied into the audio in a big way, and nothing was static, everything was dynamic. So it was super fun, super challenging.
Right. And before we dig into those systems, because, yeah, like you're saying, at the core of the gameplay exist these, physics interactions, right? And your job is to cut these apart, process them in such a way. And the first question out of the gate is sound in space. Like, let's get it out of the way so that we can agree that it's worth it in this case.
No, I mean that was kind of like the whole hook that we hung everything on, was that there is no sound in space. Like that was kind of like numero uno. And it started off kind of like joking, like, oh Ben, there's nothing for you to do, there's no sound in space, LOL. So that was kind of like what it started with. And then the more we looked at what the game was, this was in the really early days, the more we looked at the game, like the character of the game, like the fact that it was it's not hard sci-fi. The world is not a hard sci-fi world, but it's kind of hard sci-fi adjacent. So
Yeah.
it's close enough to hard sci-fi to not do kind of like woo-woo stuff where it's kind of like, oh, we just don't explain that, it's just a thing that happens. Like we can't get away with Star Wars style sound design. Like cool though that is, that's not the vibe of our universe.
Right.
So we kind of just had to build from there and sort of say, well, okay, there is no sound in space. Like, we have to accept that when you are separated from a thing that happens by a vacuum, we have to accept that sound can't travel. And then, like, the rest of the job of putting the game audio experience together for that game was working around that fact.
Yeah, yeah.
So essentially, we tried wherever we could to stay true to that. We do cheat a couple of times here and there, and we can kind of talk about that. But yeah, fundamentally, there is no sound in space, and in our game, we pretty much stick to that. Yeah.
Yeah. Except in service of the gameplay, except in service of that experience, right? Because sound plays such a vital role in communicating the world, the environment, the job, right? And so you have to make that accommodation for sure.
Yeah, definitely. And it was the challenge was like working out how to get the level of immersion we wanted and the level of player feedback that we wanted, while also kind of being true to that concept that sound doesn't travel through a vacuum.
Yeah.
So that was when we had to kind of interrogate what was being simulated to work out where we could put sound and still kind of like stick to the rules. So we had like, we knew that the player was inside a kind of like a spacesuit for like a kind of, we didn't used to call it a spacesuit, we call it like a kind of, I can't remember what we used to call it, but there was a kind of like a name for the kind of protective suit that you wear when you're on the job. And inside that we had an atmosphere. So we could allow sound to play inside the suit. So you can hear your breathing. You have a helmet radio that can kind of pipe in music. It can pipe in atmospheric sounds. We'll get into this later, but we had a whole kind of fictional piece of in-game technology called the resynthesizer, which when you were surrounded by hazards like flames or burst fuel pipes or whatever, the idea is that the resynthesizer would kind of make a fake version of that sound to try and keep you alive for longer so you didn't get blown up by this stuff. And then, when you go inside a ship, if it's pressurized, then we had kind of a fully, more conventional soundscape where sound would travel because there's air inside a spaceship. You have sound traveling normally, you had reverbs, all that kind of stuff. Yeah. And then if you depressurize the ship, all that stuff went away. And the moment of depressurizing a ship is quite a cool moment as you switch from having airborne sound to having none. Yeah. And then we also kind of built up this system whereby if you touch objects, you feel the vibrations coming through as you touch them. So between, which is another thing we can totally get into. Between kind of like the resynthesis stuff, between the stuff coming through the helmet radio speaker, the inside of the suit having an environment that's simulated, and then having airborne sound when there's air, no airborne sound when there's none, and then the touch transfer stuff. That was essentially the kind of bedrock of the experience. And then there were the times where we just straight up cheated and we played a sound because we wanted to, and it didn't really obey those rules, but we kept it really, really rare, and we tried to justify it as more of like a kind of emotional sound or like psychological sound.
Yeah, lots of abstract stuff. I remember one of the design directions I got for when you're flying through this thruster that's kind of exploding, and it was like, okay, so we don't want to hear fire, but I want the sound of synthetic abstract internal fire. And you're like, oh, okay. So that seems like a bit of a cheat, but it's more about the stress the player is under as they're trying to do this very dangerous job, I guess.
Yeah, definitely. It's kind of like, can you make the sound of the feeling of being afraid of fire?
Perfect. Well, what a great setup for what we're going to dig into here as we go hands-on with the Wwise authoring application. We're going to look at some videos of gameplay. We're going to talk through systems. We're going to look at some of the tools that you used to create these sounds and systems. And as you said, the bedrock of it is this physics-based, realistic interpretation of sound. So where should we start?
Do we have like a video kind of just showing a little clip of the game, so if people haven't seen it, they
Yeah.
can just get a little flavor of like a minute or 30 seconds of
Sure.
gameplay.
Yeah, let's put something in there. I am going to grab that here. Maybe this. Do you have a suggestion over there? I've got the host of videos, but maybe there's a trailer I should grab for it.
That's a good point. It's almost like we should have talked about this before.
It's almost like it's a live stream and we're just making it up as we go along, which is great. Speaking of that, shout out to Argentina Audio in the chat from Dante, and just a bunch of great audio related vocalizations happening in there while we're talking. So thanks to folks. And as always, weave through any questions that you might have. We got Santiago from Argentina. So a bunch of great folks hanging out with us today for this talk.
Awesome.
What do you
Well, I
think?
think video-wise, do you want to just like pick one from whatever set you have and let's just play a clip and then we can get into the details.
Yeah, here it comes. So I'm going to switch to video, pop open. How about let's whet the appetite with a little bit of the resynthesis video that we have.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
Nice.
I love
think
it.
that would-
Really illustrative of some of the hazardous pieces that you were talking about for sure. We got a little bit of that resynthesis that we'll be talking about coming up. And yeah, I think people get the vibe, right? Ladies and gentlemen, we're floating in space.
Absolutely, and I think we couldn't hear the audio from that video, but like I think the first half was the kind of resynthesized version of the hissing from the canister kind of in space. So like that was the kind of version that was resynthesized, and then the one inside the ship was probably the like the airborne version. So yeah,
That sounds
kind of
right.
get the two different sides of the coin. Yeah, cool. Well, yeah, like should we just kind of like jump into some of the systems then and start looking at some of this stuff?
I think it's time. Let's make good on this hands-on piece and dig in deep to these systems and Hardspace Shipbreaker.
Okay, nice. Well, I'm gonna start with this this video that oh, where's it gone? Here we go. So this is let me just get this shared up.
Yeah. And
Okay.
there's music back in the cabana when you land for the night, if I remember. There's occasional threads of music, but I would not say it's a music-heavy game, right? It sets the mood on occasion, but otherwise, it's a very environmental game.
Yeah, and we pretty much decided that the music was essentially diegetic. So you know you do hear there's music in your hab, where your bed is, where you know where you kind of like repair your equipment, that kind of stuff. we do kind of pipe some stuff in there, and the idea is that the corporations piping you in that music to relax you and all the rest of it. And then when you actually start your workday, if you do read all the lore, the music you get piped in through your headset is again like chosen by the corporation. So they've done kind of like psychological assessments on their workers to determine like what type of music people work most productively to. And so this is why they're playing you. Like your profile is a match for this kind of Americana, and that's why you get this Americana. And then yeah, like the more you play, like, the more you kind of, we had this idea of getting in the zone at work, where the music's initially it's mono and it's processed to sound like it's coming through this speaker. The longer you play and the longer you've gone without blowing something up or anything like that, the music widens slowly and becomes stereo, and the radio processing goes away. So the longer you're playing without accidents, the wider and deeper the music sounds, and the more it kind of sucks you in and lulls you into this sound. So it's kind of like, it's diegetic, but it kind of like leaps into back and forth between being like score and diegetic, depending on how your workday is going. So
Interesting.
yeah.
And does that reset then? You have accident and
Yep,
Yeah.
exactly.
Kind of
Yeah.
like takes you out of the zone a
Yeah.
bit, right? Like you're kind of going about, and then you cut and you accidentally hit a fuel pipe and explodes, and then you have to kind of like settle yourself down, and we
Yep.
have that synth score that comes underneath that warns you about nearby dangers, etc.
Yeah, exactly.
Nice.
Or you know, if your supervisor chirps in to remind you you've got like a minute left in the ship, it's like, oh, you know, you kind of startle it and it goes back to mono again. So yeah, so it's pretty cool. But I wanted to share this little. I have a video that should be up here. Yeah, so in that first video we watched with the spinning canister, I just wanted to talk about something that we implemented, which is, as these objects are spinning, they're giving their kind of angular velocity to us as a parameter. So,
Right.
so when, instead of having just a static loop as an object's kind of spinning in space, we could make it sound like it was kind of Dopplering a little bit, even though
Right.
it wasn't actually moving from left to right. Perhaps the you know, where you could see a plume coming out of this object, it might have been at one end of the object. Of course, the actual pivot point, the logical pivot point for the game, is staying still.
Yeah.
But it looks to the player like a plume is spinning around in space. So just having a static loop on the object as it's spinning around kind of sucked.
Yeah.
So we
And
got
unpack that term angular velocity for me for a
Yeah, I mean,
second, because I'm super into it, but what is it even?
Well, I'm probably not the best person to define it, but my understanding of it is essentially the speed at which the object is rotating.
Right.
So it's kind of, yeah, like the angle being like literally the rotation, and the velocity being like how fast it's spinning. So that's my understanding of it. There's probably a better mathematical definition of it, or
That makes
you know,
sense.
yeah, or a computer science-y thing that I'm not fully aware of. But that was what I understood it to be, and in terms of like
Perfect.
the values that we were getting in Wise, that seemed to be what it was representing.
So, and we're seeing that represented in the graphs here on the bottom.
Yeah, exactly. This is a shot, like this is a screen capture from, oh, I don't know, at least 3, maybe even 4 years ago when we first implemented it. That's one thing that's worth mentioning. This game was in development for a very long time, with what was initially a very small team. We started working on this game. I mean, I wasn't even hired when the team started working on it. It was maybe back in 2016, I think they started working on it. And I came in 2017, and we had a team of, I want to say 10 people working on it for about 2.5 years, and then started to bring in, you know, people like yourselves to like help finish it off. And we should also credit, there's another sound designer who worked on it a lot, who is not able to be here today. This is Matt Ryan, who did a lot of amazing work on the game too. So yeah, props to Matt.
Great.
Anyway, yeah, so this was, when talking about a lot of these systems, it's kind of like going back through the memory banks a bit, because it's been such a long time since we implemented them. But anyway, this thing, as it spins, you will see and hopefully hear the parameter affecting the kind of flame sound. So we get regular kind of motion as it goes left and right, but as I make it spin, we'll get the angular velocity.
That's so cool, and we can see how it's applied on the RTPC curve
Yeah.
across pitch and volume for
Yeah.
both the angular velocity as well as the object velocity.
Yep. Yep. And it's very subtle amounts of pitch change. Like, I don't know if you can see my mouse cursor, but over on the right hand side, you can see that RTPC point on the right hand side is barely doing anything.
Right.
Like, well, I mean, I guess it doesn't help that the range of that voice pitch is something like 8 octaves. So
Yeah.
it's maybe moving it like 200 cents.
200 cents. Yeah, exactly.
Something like that. Yeah. But yeah, it's one of those things that on its own, you know, it's not the kind of feature that like blows you away, but once it's combined with a lot of the other features, it's just like deepening of immersion, which is very much like kind of what we were trying to do in the game.
It's really just all the little things that add up into a believable experience, right? Because
Yeah.
we may not have ever been in space with spinning canisters of flames, but we might be able to imagine what that would sound like or how it would react in real life. And so meeting that with some level of dynamism that is in sync with what's happening on the screen, like, again, those little things add up, every little thing.
Yeah, absolutely.
What a
Yeah,
cool
that's-
technique.
Yeah, cool. It worked great. And we did have to kind of do some optimization on it once we had it combined with another system, which I can take a quick look at here as well. 1 second.
Just while he's bringing that up,
Yeah.
I should say, like, it's one of the biggest challenges on this game is that there's only really one level. You know, you're always looking at the same area, the same furnace and the processor, and doing your same job every day in, day out. And so one of the biggest challenges is to make it feel different and dynamic each time by using different, you know, ship parts, and then having ships that are pressurized and aren't, and having the same music, you know, throughout. So I think what I'm getting at is these systems all really work together to make the audio experience feel fresh, even though it's a lot of the same, you know, stuff that
Yeah.
you're experiencing, right?
Yeah.
Because you're not
Yeah.
relying on like level changes or environment changes. You know, it's
Yeah.
that.
There's no space forest level, right? Or underwater level.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, no, and you know, I don't want to say most, but a lot of titles, you can get a lot of your audio implementation by kind of putting trigger volumes in the world, and as you move through the world, change the sound. We can't do that at all because our world is not static. Like each ship that you're inside is able to move and drift, even if it's kind of like whatever, like 300 meters long. You can enter the engine room, and then if you blow up something in the ship, the entire ship can move and drift off, and suddenly your engine room is not where it was in the world. So everything was dynamic. So everything was procedural. So the ships were procedurally assembled
Yeah.
when you kind of spawned them. So we couldn't just hand place audio changes in ships because we didn't know what version of a reactor room we were going to get. We didn't know where the reactor was going to be in the ship. It could spawn in 20 different places. So it's so if we wanted to make the sound of the reactor come, you know, kind of emanating throughout the whole ship, we had to have something dynamic that would make sure the sound was located where the reactor was going to be located, which doesn't sound like it was that difficult, but when you wanted to tie it into things like the touch transfer system and the resynthesis system as well, it does kind of layer on additional difficulties. But I wanted to look at this video on the right here.
Great.
Well, it's on the right for me, probably not on the right for anyone else. So this is when we were looking at the angular velocity stuff a minute ago. That was layered on top of what we call the cluster system, and the cluster system was written by this incredible programmer called Trevor Ware, and we explained that one of the problems that we wanted to get around early on was that you could have potentially 100, well not 100, let's say 20 different flaming canisters all in the same little tiny area, and we didn't want it to sound like 20 flaming canisters, 20 layered sounds of one flaming canister. We wanted it to sound like a huge group of flaming objects, which is sonically gonna require a different treatment. So he created this system whereby if the objects that were all emitting the same hazard type, so here we have like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 5 flaming canisters. Instead of having one emitter per canister, we have an emitter in the center, which passes through as an RTPC the number of flaming objects that are in that cluster. And as you can see, I'm going to move around this cluster, and we give weighting to the position of the cluster center, so that it's always kind of moving its position a little closer to the player, regardless of. So it's not just at the center of where the objects are. It's always trying to give itself a position that's a little bit close to the player, and that helps with the positioning. And we were using spread in Wwise as well, so that when you're close, you spread the sound across speakers, and as you backed off, the spread got less, so you got more of that sense of it being located in the world the further you're away from it, and more of it being around you the closer you are to it. But yeah, let's take a quick look at that video, and you can see this cluster at work.
Cool.
So as I move around, I'm going to pull this guy, and you can see it starts to stretch the location of that cluster emitter. And eventually, if I pull it far enough away, it'll kind of ping free. And then that's now a cluster of 1. So we have a cluster of 4 and a cluster of 1. Then I go back to the other cluster, and they're still acting as a cluster of 4. And you can see as I move around, that location of the center point is kind of moving to follow me a little bit, and then again I'll ping another one loose, and I'll take it over to, so that's now a cluster of 1. I'll take it over to join this other one, and it becomes a cluster of 2. So now we have 2 separate clusters. And this was incredibly helpful, and once this tech was in place, we just forgot about it. It just worked. Yeah.
Yeah, another tiny piece that all adds up to dynamic immersion, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Recommends maintaining a safe distance from flammable items.
So yeah, that was a really awesome bit of tech, and I think I have another video.
So if I can ask though, as you're decoupling and recoupling, you're adding to the RTPC for the number of object type in a cluster. What's that controlling? What are you driving with that?
It's great that you asked, because here we have the exact thing on the Wwise side. So it's just literally driving a blend container. And we have a cluster size. This parameter is literally called cluster_size.
Perfect.
And as you ramp up and down through the cluster, you just literally blend between the first sample here. So we have this first sample when the size is 1. It's just a sound of a single object burning. And then as you blend up through the range, you bring in maybe the sound of a couple of objects burning, and then a large group of objects burning. And I think we only have 3 samples on this blend track. We may well have revised this later. I think this was just the kind of temp content. Mm-hmm. So this probably isn't the content that we shipped with, but this is the implementation.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure.
And then obviously you can't see them, but they also drive high pass, low pass, pitch, and volume. So I can't see here, but probably the bigger the cluster, the lower the pitch, and then the high pass probably gets removed. So yeah, and that's it. And I think again, I can't see it because it's not visible on the attenuation editor there, but I'm pretty sure spread was hooked up to distance. That would be right. So
Yeah.
so it's
You've got a different distance attenuation curve
yeah.
specific to that.
Yeah, I think the clusters probably had their own attenuation curve, and it was probably high spread value at, close proximity, and then low spread value as you backed off from it, I think. Yeah.
Right, and you could either have that, for a single sound, what is the spread when you're just engaging with one, and then you could apply different spread values to different attenuations for the bigger cluster pileups, so that you hear the big cluster from further away. It maybe spreads a bit more because it's bigger.
Yeah, you absolutely could. I don't know if we did, but
Sure.
you absolutely could.
Again, I think you can always drive towards even more complexity, and I imagine always trying to balance the payoff of some of these systems. Like there's got to be some where you're like, that's going to be really cool and really hard. We're going to pass on that one.
Yeah, definitely. In fact, the whole touch transfer system was something that kind of required selling to the production team, and was on the chopping block a number of times.
Now,
we had
are we going to dig into touch transfer here? Because I think you should give us the high level of what that is. I have some knowledge of it after digging into the great blog that you wrote at the Audiokinetic blog.
Awesome.
But let's talk about touch transfer.
Yeah, cool. So yeah, like this is and like help me out if I screw up the description, but like it's essentially we have a whole bunch of emitter types in the game. Some ambient emitters, some point source environmental emitters. And also your tools are set up to do this as well. So the idea is that when you're in a pressurized environment, so when you're in a kind of environment like the inside of a ship here, if this was pressurized, in this video right now it's depressurizing, which means it's in the process of losing its air. If you're in this ship, you expect to hear sound normally. So looking at this this screen, you've got this kind of like air purifier type object above the door. You've got some kind of electronic
There's a power generator.
like power generator or something beside the door. You've got some other things here and there that are clearly like connected to power. Like there's a computer terminal a little bit further back. As you move past all of these objects, when there's air inside the ship, they all have sound. So they all have a point source sound, which I think you set up most of them. Yeah. So, and then when it adds so much to the immersion, it really feels like you're in the ship and there is active systems around you. And that's important from a gameplay perspective, because if these things are connected to power, they're very hazardous. So if you were to just like yank one off the wall when it was still connected to power or cut into it, it would kind of like let out a kind of electrical blast that would damage you.
Yeah.
So we tied it into the power system, which I know you did a lot of work on. So like all of these objects, when disconnected from power, are safe, so they don't make sound anymore. So it's like, not only is it super immersive, it's like really like closely tied to gameplay. Anyway, you suck all the air out of the inside of this thing. All of that goes away. All of that information is gone.
Yeah.
So we wanted to replace that and make sure you were still able to kind of like hear the hazards and get that immersion through this system called touch transfer, which is just contact-borne sound, essentially.
So what I'm hearing is I touch the thing, I hear it when I'm touching it. And the sound will be different depending on what I'm touching, and I can use that sound as a way to communicate the environment and understand hazards, for instance.
Exactly. So I'll play this video, which just kind of shows the player like being in a pressurized ship depressurizing it and then going around touching a few things, so you can kind of get an idea of how the system works.
Great.
Air pressure level decreasing.
Yeah. So
Right.
each sound you hear in touch transfer is the 3D sound that you hear in the standard kind of airborne sound environment. So it's not like it's a kind of version of the sound. It's the same sound run through a bunch of filters, I think. Yeah.
Yeah.
2D sound.
Oh yeah, we
Yeah.
did, didn't we? Yeah. So
yeah.
we had a 2D and a 3D version of the same sound. So it's a 2D sound when you touch it, but it's the exact same core
Of course,
waveform.
yeah, absolutely.
Cool.
I remember, I think when I was designing one of the sounds, I was standing beside one of the power supplies, I think, but I was not looking at it, and I was hearing the sound. I was like, why am I hearing the sound? Oh, maybe my arm is touching it. So
Yeah.
I'm hearing a touch transfer from my suit and not my hand.
Yeah.
It was
Yeah. Exactly.
That's
Yeah,
deep realism. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, we had a whole bunch of different versions of the touch transfer kind of content. Essentially, there was the sound of the ambiences. So there were 2D ambiences, and if you just touch a wall, you hear the 2D ambience through the wall. And then if you touch an object, then the sound of the wall is kind of being transferred through that object because it's attached to the wall.
Got it.
But the point source is a more unique sound than the 2D ambience. So if you're engaged in touch transfer, the point source sound ducks down the touch transferred ambience sound, so you can hear the point source touch transferred sound. If that makes sense.
I mean, it's deep, but it communicates, right? Because
Right.
you're wanting to shift the focus of what is important, and
Exactly.
and it's a almost prioritization ducking system, right?
Yeah, definitely. And it's just about like wanting to make the content shine as well. Like the
Yeah.
fact that, we put so much content into these like 3D point source emitters. If you touch one of them and you just hear the ambience, that's crap. Like, you're not hearing the character of the object that you touched. You're hearing the character of the wall, which you can also touch. And like if you just touch that, you can totally just hear the ambience.
Yeah.
But if you're touching the object, I want players to be able to hear the sound of that object because that's the thing that you've touched.
Right. And digging into that, like how many individual sources can you hear at a time? Like, are there objects you can touch that excite not just the object and one ambient, but also multiple other ones? Like, how deep does it go?
I don't know.
Okay.
I think you can touch a lot.
Yeah.
I don't think. I mean, there's got to be some kind of limit.
But it's
Well, so we had set up, to Carl's point, there's a touch transfer where you're physically using a button to touch something, and then there's like a contact, like you run into a wall, and we want to immerse the player and also give them some audio feedback. And I think that all that content gets overridden when you specifically say, I would like to figure out what's, like, if this gas line has something in it before I cut it, right?
Yeah, definitely. There's like the hands touch transfer is more significant than like the body touch transfer. Like in Carl's example, if I had my elbow against I don't know, like
screen.
Screen, say, and then I reach out and touch a computer, I would hear the screen get ducked in favor of what I've like chosen to touch.
Right.
So, yeah.
It's almost like an environmental synthesis, right? Environmental sound synthesis, right? I'm almost imagining it like in the context of a synthesizer, right? Where you've got different keys that you press, you've got a little bit of polyphony where you can play multiple at the same time, but some of them are more important, and it just generates an environmental soundscape by what you touch.
Definitely, and it really does help with immersion in a kind of as a bigger way than I'd even hoped. Because when you're playing a game, a lot of the time things just they might have like a emissive thing on it or something to make it look like it's got some activity inside it. Like let's say it's a computer or something, but there is something about walking up to that thing and touching it and kind of feeling that vibration. It makes it feel like it really is full of stuff. Like it's got circuits in there, it's got batteries, it's got this and capacitors, and it's like it's not just an empty polygonal box anymore. It's got things inside it that are doing things. It really does cement that home. So yeah, it's a really tactile experience. So yeah, super happy with that.
Well, and we're talking all day long about systems. We're talking all day long about these little things that add up into the bigger experience, and this must be kind of unique. Like, it's not many games where I can just walk up to a tree, start rubbing it, and like hear the sound of that tree, for instance, or spread out on the ground and do wave my hands in the grass and hear the sound of the grass. And so you really have taken environmental storytelling in a game that is primarily about environmental storytelling and allowed the environment to tell that story through sound.
That's awesome, and yeah, that's exactly what we're doing. And another video I want to show on touch transfer here real quick is so this is the system tying into gameplay in ways that again were really super effective. So I'll just talk a little bit about this video before I play it, because I won't talk while I play it because it's kind of the sound's kind of subtle. Essentially, the ships are full of these pipe systems. You can see those like big, thick red pipes. If you cut into those pipes before flushing the fuel out of them, then everything explodes and it's really, really bad. But if you flush the fuel, then obviously you're good to cut the pipes. So we wanted the sound to tie into that directly. So if you have a pressurized ship, you can hear the pipe systems hissing and churning. And you know when the pipes are safe because they're not making that sound anymore. Obviously, if there's no air in the ship, you can't do that anymore. So we wanted the touch transfer to help you in that regard as well. And it's kind of cool because often the flush valves are at the opposite end of the ship from the section of the pipe that you might want to cut. So by the time you're kind of like back at the piece of pipe you want to cut, can you really remember if it was this one that you made it safe or was it the other one? So by touching it, you could kind of make sure that it's safe or not. So this is that exact scenario happening in the game. So I'll just play this.
Excellent.
Air pressure level decreasing.
So there you go. That was the final result of all of that kind of bargaining with the production team and designing and ducking of this and that and setting up all the systems. And yeah, we got there in the end. So yeah.
Yeah, you could really hear as well with the second pipe you hadn't fleshed. When you do touch it, you can hear all the like whirring of the ship. That the ship is actually being powered, but then also the gas line going through, so you can tell it's still kind of doing this, which is cool.
Yeah, and that's the example of what we were talking about earlier, where you were technically touching the wall because the pipe is attached to the walls of the ship. And in that situation, somewhere in Wise, there would be a ducker making sure that the pipe sound is ducking down the ambient sound, even though the two of them are active in terms of the touch transfer system. So yeah. So do we want to look at like the Wise side of that at all? Like, do we want to take a dive into that?
I'm fascinated. If you want to flip the hood on that, I'm here for it.
Let's flip
Absolutely.
it.
While he's bringing this up, we should mention that so the original kind of game jam to get this game going was based off kind of the vibe of the movie Gravity with Sandra Bullock, where like you're trying to grapple around, and the team did a really good job making space scary, obviously, and the actual zero-G controls are quite good. And we wanted to really support that, which is where this touch transfer system comes in. That movie did a great job of really only having sounds come through the mix if one of the characters was touching something or interacting with it in some way.
Yeah, it was a massive inspiration. And yeah, there was that movie, which was like when did that come out? Like 2014 or something?
Yeah, I think that was yeah.
Yeah.
2014.
And we took so much inspiration from that, especially with the touch transfer system, and then right in the kind of thick of the kind of busy section of development, right when you're kind of second guessing yourself and wondering if you've made terrible decisions, there was another movie that came out called Ad Astra, I think it was.
Yeah.
Which was like a Brad Pitt movie. And they really heavily leaned into the same thing, like doing no sound in space and lots of contact-borne sound and very point of view. And it was, I mean, to hear what they managed to do with that movie was kind of fuel to our fire. Just when we were kind of really second-guessing ourselves, we were like, no, it can be done. These are valid choices that we've made, and we just have to keep pushing, and we can make this sound good. So yeah, it was awesome.
Nice.
Cool. So yeah, this is Wise, and you'll notice it's really old. It's a really old version of Wise, 2019.2
Sure.
or 15. Obviously, like it's like mentioned, it took a very long time to make the game. So we started back in 2016. We did several Wise upgrades, and at some point we just had to stop.
Totally.
And this is kind of we launched in early access in 2020. So kind of, I think once we were out in early access, we basically said, well, the game is out. We're going to have to like take the long-term support versions, but that's basically it. We're out in 2019, version 2019.
Yeah.
So yeah, right now I've got to remember how any of this worked.
Well, it still looks like a familiar Wise to me, having grown up with Wise since I think the first version I used might have been well, I don't even want to hazard a guess. I think it'll just show my age, but there's a lot of fundamentals here that clearly have served you well in your implementation.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'm maybe not the best person to talk about this. I think I didn't set most of this up, but like this is, for example, I'm going to find something. What do we know? Definitely touch transfer as well. The cryo pipe, I guess that's a good one.
Sure. Yeah.
So, yeah, I don't know how much you can see in here, but we have a blend container. This is the kind of the thing the event actually triggers in game.
Yep.
We have there's an event SFXN for cryo pipe. It plays a blend container. It also seeks the blend container, so it's offsetting the start position each time it plays. And then inside this blend container, we have the two sounds. One of which is the
Airborne.
airborne
Yeah,
one, totally. And then the other one is the _TT one, which is the touch transfer version. And if I go to positioning on these, then this one is obviously it's a standard 3D attenuation. It has its own special attenuation, which I think was pipes were special case, weren't they? Pipes, because we didn't have like a kind of spline emitter. We just kind of stacked
yeah.
point source emitters down the length of a pipe. So we had to kind of craft the but it was every section of pipe, because again the pipe runs were somewhat procedurally
Yeah.
laid out
That's small, yeah.
during
Yep.
when the ships were spawning. So we just kind of had to place emitters on these sections of pipe, knowing that they could get chained into really weird, funky shapes and stuff. But yeah, there's no kind of fancy like spline emitter stuff at all. It's just like a lot of point source emitters.
And what you say that, what you mean is like, you know, these emitters get attached to the object. These objects, like Lego blocks, get assembled by the game, you know, in different fashions. And so the sounds attached to it will get duplicated over and over along with that section of pipe, versus other implementations that could share an emitter for multiple objects that are the same, without having to duplicate it, and allow it to just dynamically move in relation to the listener in a way that's optimized and doesn't duplicate, and just kind of breaking that down a little bit.
Kind of like our cluster emitter. Like if we'd had a cluster emitter but for pipes, so we had like one little thing that slid along the length of the pipe as you moved along it. That would have been. We wanted that, but we just didn't have time to build it.
Yeah, and I think to get around that and make sure our voice instancing didn't go crazy, we used the priority RTBC to make sure that there were only a few playing, like based on how close the player was to each emitter, I believe.
Yeah, you're totally right about that.
If you go to the RTBC tab.
Yeah, you can see playback priorities linked to an RTBC. So priority, over distance.
Beautiful.
Priority goes down. So but yeah, essentially like it's all done with sends, I think, isn't it? The touch transfer. Yeah. So you can see here's like the way we implemented the actual touch transfer kind of activation. So this outputs through a bus which gets muted when you remove air from a ship. So it goes through our kind of environmental AB. AB is airborne. So it goes through our environmental airborne bus. So muted as soon as you remove the air. And then the touch transfer one goes to a bus which is essentially always muted, but the sound is playing, but the bus itself is muted. Because we weren't in a position to kind of start and stop the sounds when you touched them. We wanted them all to be kind of playing all the time, and just kind of raising the level on them as you touched them, essentially. I forget the reason for that, but there was a reason at the time. I think it was just because the objects, essentially, there was only one play call, and it was when the object spawned.
Yeah, that's right.
So we didn't have a kind of event play call on touch. We had it basically right at the beginning when the ship spawns in. The objects just start playing their environmental sounds. So
they play silent. You're keeping them alive in the advanced settings, or you're I guess you're keeping them alive as virtual voices.
That's what we're doing.
Send to virtual voice and then resume on physical. Yeah, exactly.
Perfect.
that. And then like you can see we have a couple of buses receiving from this based on an RTPC value, and that's a hands touch transfer hands and then touch transfer procs. And touch transfer hands is obviously when you actually touch it with your hands. We get a special RTPC link to that. It's like, I think it's binary. I think it's either just 0 or 1. And then the procs is proximity based, so it's kind of like when you might have kind of put your leg up against something or brushed it with your shoulder, we'll get like that raising of an RTPC for as long as you're kind of like touching the object. And we have, if I remember rightly, around the player we have a collider around the player, but then we have this other collider which is called Squishy Collide. And Squishy Collide is just like what are you basically near enough to be considered touching without snagging on it? You know what I mean? So
Yes.
like you might touch a door frame in terms of our system, and probably some other systems are reading that as well, but you don't actually have to physically bump into the door frame to be considered touching it. So it's close enough to be considered touched, but
Yeah.
not close enough to actually have to snag on it physically. So
Right.
yeah.
And that's
Hey,
specific to like the. Oh, sorry. I was just gonna say that's specific to like a 0G game where,
Yeah.
or maybe if you're on ice or something, but like you're just continuously drifting if you don't stop yourself. So you'll just kind of like lightly bump into something and hear physics collisions and stuff.
Yep.
Yeah. Sorry.
yeah, and that reminded me what you were saying, like touch transfer. We're talking about in the context of audio, and now we've got this squishy collision. And what you mentioned was that other systems across other disciplines might be leveraging these implementations, right? And I think
Yeah.
there's a key there, and I wonder if there's anything interesting about how, you're building this simulation, you're putting in place all these systems, and there's probably a lot of interaction across the other teams and what you're using or what you're sharing.
Yeah, that definitely is true. And with Squishy Collide, I'm pretty sure that system wasn't developed specifically for audio. I think we just wrote on the back of something that was convenient for us. Yeah, which was great to have it there, kind of, ready for us to use. But I'm trying to remember what that did drive originally. It might have been. I don't even know if this happened in the shipping game, but maybe in an earlier version of the game, when you got within a certain range, maybe you put your hand out to stop yourself. And I think it was maybe when you were within the Squishy Collide range, or it was something like that, or maybe they just detected when you were within Squishy Collide and they just started to slow the player down a little bit. It's something like that. I think it was used for like motion manipulation or animation reason or something like that. I don't remember.
That would all make a lot of sense, but I think the really cool thing there is that, being on the audio team, being aware of what other teams are doing, knowing what systems they're implementing, and finding opportunities where you can add to the dynamics of audio by leveraging what other people are already doing. I think that's a huge success story that we can all learn from.
Yeah, big time. We were really lucky with the team at large. The team at large really cared about sound. Like from the game director and exec producer, tech director, all the way down to the designers. Like it's hard to think of anyone on the team who didn't help us out. Like they all understood what we were trying to do, and
Nice.
the whole team was basically a set of like sound designers who really, really cared. And if there was a problem in a system, they would help us out. And
Yeah.
yeah, like yeah. It was
Well, and
amazing.
the
So-
results speak for that commitment across the entire team to audio being an integral part of communicating the experience.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, cool. So
So
yes,
we do have a question coming in. What about performance issues? With all of that collision detection happening, all of the touching and the squishy touching and, just everything that's happening there, like, where are you at? How are you handling that? How did that work out?
I don't think we had any performance issues relating from like collision detection. One thing that's worth mentioning is that we did, from a very early stage, make sure we were profiling to see CPU usage, especially when we got into custom DSP design, which we can talk about in a bit. But yeah, we were always profiling. So if there was ever a moment where we were getting an overloaded kind of stream of events coming through to Wwise, and we were getting, say, like 1,000 events on one frame, which we did see from time to time, we would catch it early, work out what was causing it, and raise it and get help from the code team or whoever we needed help from to try and address it. There was definitely a lot of optimization work done to the cluster system. I think that was like V1 of that was just a kind of like prototype, like can it work? And once it was proved out, I think it sat in that state for a long time. and then it was found to be kind of like taking up quite a lot of cycles. So I think yeah, Trevor like really super hyper optimized that system, and it you know it shipped and it's not causing problems. I think so. So yeah. Oh yeah, it is worth mentioning. We did there are occasions with physics collisions where, depending on how you have it set up, it can kind of spam Wise with collision events.
Yeah.
So we did like do a bunch of like time windowing to
Yep.
make sure that within a certain time window, certain groups of events couldn't trigger again on the same game object. So like if you pulled a computer terminal off the wall and threw it against the ship, it might, in terms of like the physics system, it might bounce like 1,000 times, you know, within the space of like a second or whatever. We would make sure to only receive a couple of the strongest kind of physics impacts through to Wise, because otherwise, yeah, Wise does choke a little bit when you throw like a lot, like thousands of events in a very small space of time, which is totally understandable. Like it's got its limits, like everything else. But that was definitely something we added really early. In fact, we kind of anticipated that problem and just made sure that when we had our physics system from day one, we had this kind of windowing in. So, you know, if an object had received a strong physics collision, and then it maybe got like a handful of weak collisions, it would just ignore the weak ones within a couple of 100 milliseconds or whatever it was.
Yeah, you know, the term I've heard used is cooldown timer, right? Or as you said, a windowing system that just prevents the posting of events for a period of time. And you brought the priority dimension into that as well, where, you know, the stronger the impact, the more important it was to keep the little ones out from around the edges.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And totally, like those are the impacts that are not useful to us, you know, in the profiler at all, right?
Yeah.
Like seeing 1,000 events is crazy, and especially in a physics-based game where you can cut a wall into 100 pieces and then blast it with a grapple gun. Like I think there were problems really early on with small little pieces of objects that would impact each other in a cluster and then hit a wall, and that's probably where this all came from as well. So.
Yeah, definitely. And I think we were kind of lucky in a few ways, because it wasn't just sound that was, you know, getting affected by that. It was obviously visual effects as well. Like they were trying to for every like tiny little bit of cut object, they were I think the original intention was like to have, you know, molten edges on every piece to sort of show where it, you know, broken and stuff.
Yeah.
And obviously, like you do that too many times and you get rendering issues, and so they made the very small pieces, like you were saying, like just disappear. So if you cut something too small, it just disappears. So yeah, that kind of helped us out as well.
It vaporizes, Ben.
Vaporizes.
Yeah.
Sorry.
That
Yeah.
makes sense.
That's
But
right.
yeah,
Right.
that is definitely a performance issue for sure.
Yeah. And you alluded to this idea of clustering for physics impact sounds just now. Does it use the same system?
No, I should clarify. A cluster of objects as opposed to the clustering system. Yeah.
Okay.
Sorry about that.
Just checking.
I don't know if we're talking about that later, but there was a great system that was designed for how to handle physics collisions with these smaller objects, though, whereby you start with you know, a typical collision that has velocity curves and calculates mass of an object, and then when you cut it in half, we're actually changing out the content based on what type of material it is, but also how much is left of the whole. So they'll say like, hey, if you have 33% of this object, we may just use some RTBCs to filter out low and high pass, but you can only go so far with that when it's a small bit.
Yeah.
So we're actually able to like swap out content when there were bits that were technically part of you know, a cryo pipe, but now they're just generic metal. Like we don't need a pipe sound for it.
Yeah, exactly. It's like there's a threshold after which a piece of an object is no longer the object. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like if you cut a wafer of metal off the end of a canister,
Yeah.
it's not a canister anymore. It's just a wafer of metal.
Yeah.
So we had to have a physics system that could kind of have a tag for the object and then like a fallback to what we called the family. And the family was just like, what kind of material are you made of? And then it was more kind of like mass based parameter changes. So if it was like a bigger piece or a smaller piece, it would sound different.
And so it drives from the specific of here's an object. It may have its own unique sound when you interact with it. It bounces off stuff. Canister, for example, sounds like a canister. It's got the tong, bong, whatever, right? But as you slice that into tiny pieces, it falls back to just being a metal object, and it has different size pieces, like you were saying, its mass, its size,
Yeah.
feeding into that.
If you put the Wwise project up again, yeah. So we have. Let's have a look. Oh, I don't know what could possibly be preventing these from playing. It's might need object mass. Okay, so yeah, collision intensity. Some of these need more. Okay, so
Great.
you've got. So obviously, like some of the canisters were huge, kind of fuel canisters. So as they bounced around, you've got the kind of sound you might expect. So inside the engine, we would apply a tag to the object, which says when it bounces, play this event, physics canister exterior impact, and then we would give it a second tag, which would be play cut piece metal heavy impact, say.
Right.
That doesn't sound like it could possibly be from the same thing, but maybe it's that. So, and then with the object mass, you can really change the perception of the object, and obviously with intensity. So you can really kind of make it sound way bigger, way smaller. So we might, I don't know if those two were ever paired in the engine, but that's the type of thing we could do. We could give the kind of the object its specific tag, and then say if you have a cut piece which is less than
It's 33%.
30 feet. Is that what it is for everything? So if you cut an object below 33%, it flips to the second tag, which might be the more generic sound. So yeah.
Perfect. And again, like this is a design it once system that just propagates across all of the objects and object types. You tag it with these events, and systemically it just happens in the game. And it's this kind of smart application of a system that then just paves the way for these dynamic interactions throughout the game.
Yeah, totally. And like one of the funnest bits of the game is when all these systems start doing things at the same time, and you get results, you get combinations of results that surprise you and amuse you.
Yeah, well, one thing that we've kind of alluded to both in the combo of systems is that I don't know if we talked about the fact that when you do touch a wall and a physics object bangs into the wall, we are playing that physics object even though you're not in a pressurized space.
Yeah.
And that is the kind of voodoo mastery I don't really understand. I can't remember how we did it.
So that was So the idea is that if you're touching a wall and a massive canister flies into the wall and goes bang, you hear it because the wall you're touching just got impacted. So that's the justification for it. So yeah, we essentially we throw the physics sounds through a different touch transfer bus, and tech director Richard wrote this bonkers system where each time there's a collision, the collision says, hey, is one of the colliding objects being touched or connected to a hierarchy which is being touched? Because the collision, in theory, an object could collide with a pipe which is connected to a wall which is connected to another wall which you're touching. So it's like Richard's code kind of like traces the connections and says, well, there is a physical path to that collision. So you should raise the bus in Wise, and then I believe it's just attenuation based, but we're essentially kind of still using attenuations for that scenario, but we are filtering it. We're using some kind of low pass and convolution process to make it sound like it's kind of resonating through the walls.
Yeah. Wow.
Nice.
No, I dig it, and I love hearing about how the design of it extends outside of the audio team. Obviously, there's a lot of things in play in a emergent system like this, and seeing the behind the scenes is great. You've got these two different game parameters for mass and intensity, just wired into the different filters and volumes. It's great.
Yeah, it's really simple as well, and there's actually, we could have gone to the extremes of designing all sorts of content for smaller collisions, bigger collisions. We did a lot with an envelope, actually, didn't we? Yeah, we drive. There's a. I don't. Oh, you probably can't see that, unfortunately. But let me see if I can share this. 1 second.
We're with you.
Okay, here we go. So there's the attack time. Oh yeah, this is like super.
Oh yeah.
I gotta call out the note. RTPCs actually do something. Zoom in.
Cheers to notes and putting notes in your game early, so that if you forget about what this is doing, you can get back.
Yeah, big fan of notes.
Yeah.
Can't recommend enough. But yeah, I'm not kidding when I say zoom in. Like,
Yeah.
you really got to zoom in. So yeah, you can gradually see it starting to do something there.
This is the comedy portion of
Yeah.
it.
So you can see that like as collision intensity reduces, the attack time increases. So
Cool.
we're this is like a really cheap and cheerful way to get a lot more out of your content. So if you
Yeah.
have a physics impact with like a hard attack, you can soften the attack with an envelope, which is linked to your intensity parameter. So it makes all those like heavy hitting samples suddenly, sound softer. And also, we're not just doing that; we're applying filters and whatever else. And
Sure.
I think decay time. Yeah, okay. So we're doing the kind of the opposite with decay time. So the harder the collision hits, the longer the samples ring out. So yeah, so using envelopes and driving the envelopes from physics impact parameters is really kind of value for money, I think there. Yeah.
Yeah, well, and it's a great technique to use and reuse your content in a way that gives it more dynamics, first of all.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
wow, incredibly dynamic.
Yeah.
And I think you were showing off the hierarchy you have for a game that's built on objects. I thought a startlingly small number of unique object blend containers in that hierarchy.
Yeah, we're a tiny team. Like
Yeah.
for the first like almost 3 years, it was just me, and I was doing all of the kind of like the whole lot. And I wasn't writing all the music or anything, but everything else was, systems was down to me to design. All the Wise kind of structures, build out, blah blah blah. And then it wasn't until quite late. Well,
Yeah,
not,
like
not
2019.
yeah, 2019.
Yeah.
So, and then the team got a lot bigger, and we were able to kind of flesh out these systems. But we were always, because there was only ever at any one time myself and like 2 sound designers, we were really conscious of having to deploy our resources where they were going to have the biggest impact.
Yeah.
So when we discovered little things to kind of like make a small amount of content go a long way, like we just jumped all over it.
You said
About the
impact.
biggest impact of the game. I remember one of my first sounds was the bunny sounds. That's a big impact of the game. But it took a lot of the mass and everything to an effect, because when we were setting the bunny, it had a lot of mass in it. So every time I was bumping the wall, it was making a big sound. It was really funny. And it was eye opening for me to come in and see how everything works. Setting this up, it was incredible. Yeah.
There's a lot
Great.
to kind of like grok when you're coming in late. Yeah, definitely.
Funny.
Yeah, cool.
And show me the bunny again. This is something that you get from
yeah,
a
So this, I mean, this was in a cinematic early
Oh.
on, and people kind of gravitated towards it. So we added it to the game. And in the game, like Carl was mentioning, it was like a physics object you could find in the game and make a little squeaky toy, which I think was just some dog toy I bought from across the street. And then yeah, they surprised us and had a bunch made that
Oh. That's
probably
fantastic.
are not for sale. But they're cute, yeah.
Wow.
Nice.
Cool.
So, do we? I'm aware that we have a whole bunch of stuff about PureData that we were gonna step in.
I think we should go all the way there, and who can set up PureData for me? Like, what is it? Why is it?
I don't even know where to start. I'm not like I only use PureData on this project. I don't have a history with PureData.
Yeah.
I came to it because I wanted to make a couple of effects for the game. Like, it was very, very specific. But I mean, I guess it's a complete like audio programming language, a visual programming language for audio essentially. And it's like, if you're familiar with Max MSP or anything like that, it's got a lot in common. I think it's open source.
I think so too. We'll take a look at what that looks like. It has a quite unique interface that you use, and it has a long history in games. I remember when mobile games started to become a thing, there was a mobile version of PureData that came out that could run on mobile devices that people were leveraging to do sound using that as their game engine. And it, for folks who know it, this will immediately resonate as exactly what PureData is. And for folks who haven't, what we're looking at is a complex representation of sound and its creation, really.
Yeah, I mean, I wish I could like talk more knowledgeably about it, because my experience of PD is literally what we did with Shipbreaker, and I've barely scratched the surface of the other gajillion things you can do with it. I'm sure there's not much you can't do with it, really, if you're willing to get into the nuts and bolts.
Right.
But we had two very specific things that we wanted to get out of it. Well, they were related to the fiction of the game. So the first thing was this is what we're looking at right here. We can talk about it. When you bang your helmet really hard or get caught in an explosion, I wanted it to sound like the systems that were playing back radio communications or music or whatever. I wanted it to feel like they momentarily malfunctioned. So we could also, we could kind of obviously play like glitchy sounds, and we did, and we could play sounds of like the radio detuning, which we did. But I wanted to take it further if we could, and kind of like have that stuck CD type sound. When you it's going back a few years. I haven't played a CD in about two decades probably, but back in the old days when you had a CD on and you bashed the CD player, it would kind of like it would like I guess re-trigger the buffer a few times while it seeked the right point in the CD and streamed some more data in. So I wanted that kind of stuck buffer effect. There was also like a really cool VST plugin called Buffer Override from, I don't know, like probably about 20 years ago now, and it had exactly the sound that I wanted. So I wanted to recreate that.
And it wasn't a sound that you could just record and play back. It was that you wanted to take what was happening at that moment of the game, and you wanted to process it using that effect.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Like, so if you were getting, say, a message from your supervisor who was saying, oh, get a move on, you've got 5 minutes left in this shift. and you banged your helmet right when he was saying 5 minutes. I wanted it to go like 5 minutes, you know, like that's kind of what I wanted it to do.
Yeah.
Which obviously you can't can that and play it back. It has to grab the material at the time and process it. So yeah, actually, you know what? Before we get into the actual PD thing, I want to
Get the video going.
well, yeah, there's a little video of like where it started. Change videos. Oh, hold on 1 second. So before I got into PD,
Yeah.
I was messing around.
That was a good teaser. And Santiago says visual scripting for audio synthesis. This is the nailed it.
It sounds really cool.
Thanks for that. Yeah.
Okay, let me just find my video here. Oh, what have I done? Accidentally close it? No, I didn't. It's just sitting right here. But too many windows open. So yeah. ETS. Okay, so this is a little video from again a really long time ago, but this was kind of the very first implementation of it.
I don't think I've ever seen this.
Oh, really?
It's
Okay.
brand new.
Cool.
Okay.
Yeah.
So yeah, this is this is not PD. This is plug Bidule. There's a
Right.
kind of yeah, it's an awesome again a scripting language for audio, and you can use it standalone or you can host it as a VST. It's really cool, and I don't know why more people don't talk about it. It's really cool because not only can you host it as a VST and then do kind of gnarly things with sound, you can host VSTs inside of it. So you can use it as a VST wrapper, and then you can do crazy things with values and then pass those values through to parameters that you're hosting inside it. Yeah, it's really cool. Anyway,
Sounds like a
I
deep
don't know-
rabbit hole. Yeah.
Yeah, it is. Yeah. So this was like a kind of early version of that stuck buffer idea, which I scripted up in Plug
Plug.
Duel
Yeah.
with the original thought that perhaps we could just can some glitch sounds and play them back, or process, have a processed version of the sounds that we thought might go through the particular channel in Wwise and sort of fake it. So this was kind of like a proving ground to know that like we could do it, but this was not going to work in the long term because obviously when we stuffed pre-glitch samples in and triggered them in the game, it just didn't sound good at all. So getting back to PureData, so that was our kind of like proving ground, and then I realized if we wanted to do this properly, we would have to actually build an effect in PD and use heavy. So that was kind of the next step, was to build it here instead. So this, like a real simple, like quick rundown of what's happening here. We've got this, we've got the input from Wwise right here. This is the input coming from the Wwise mixer. 6 channels, because we wanted this to be post-panning on a surround bus.
Right.
Now, something I should say is if you're using heavy, for anyone who's like curious about this, you will need to modify heavy to support more than 2 channels.
Right.
So out of the box, it doesn't support 6 channels. So you'll need to make it, it's a really easy tweak. It's just like literally change one number in one place, but that's something you will need to do.
Hot tip, and pulling back from that, so you're creating the system in PureData. This is a visual scripting for audio synthesis. You're creating it with the intention for it to arrive as a plugin in Wwise, and in between that is a packaging tool called Heavy, which has been open sourced. It's out there for people to, as you suggest, modify. And what it does is it takes your PureData patch and outputs a Wwise plugin that you can then use with Wwise.
Yeah, essentially.
All
Well,
right.
it kind of it has an intermediate stage where it builds it to C++. So it generates C++ from the PD patch, and then if you open up Visual Studio or whatever, you can then generate DLLs from the C++ that you can then drop into Wwise. So it's kind of like a 2-stage process, but yeah, that's essentially it. Yeah, it does a whole bunch of Heavy makes a whole bunch of like generated code for you. Yeah.
The truth is
really
out there
cool.
for folks who
Yeah,
want to
there
dig
we
into
go.
it.
There we go.
Yeah.
So yeah, this is the graph for the kind of the buffer glitch effect. So we get 6 channels of audio in. We write that 6 channels to sort of 6 buffers. And then we have a parameter coming through from the game. You can see up here we have an HV param. That's something that gets exposed as a parameter inside of Wwise once you've built your plugin. So that's waiting for anything between 0 and 1. And then when it gets a value of 1, it tells the buffer to stick. And at that point, there's a whole bunch of controls we can use to affect like the way in which it sticks. So you can get the sort of stuck CD type sound where it just loops around a fixed chunk of buffer. But we found it was actually way more interesting to have the buffer length be kind of pseudo randomly determined. So you might have a minimum buffer length, a maximum buffer length, and then a kind of a parameter that says, well, how often do you want to randomize that length of that buffer so we can get a really cool, like glitchy sound. So should I just kind of play some stuff through this? And
Totally.
all right, here we go. So I've just got like a random like Walla sample going through this to test it. But here we go. Stick. So I can make it all sort of like, that's that kind of classic sort of stuck CD type sound.
It's great. For a minute, I thought you were breaking the internet.
So yeah, if you have the minimum time and the maximum time set to about the same, it'll just sound like a stuck CD. But if you set them to different lengths, and then there's a way you can make it slew between the different settings.
Perfect. Wow.
Anyway, I'm sure
And we're in the Matrix.
the viewer count is probably plummeting, so I'll stop that. So yeah, it's super fun, and yeah, every time you see a like HV param, like this, these are all exposed, and yeah, the mix, the amount of the signal of the stock version versus the dry version, they're all exposed in Wwise. So once you have this compiled to a DLL, and you've got it in Wwise, you can configure like, you know, what type of sticking buffer effect you want. If you want it like really short, buzzy, or long and CD player style, or anywhere in between, you can kind of configure that. So it's really a lot of fun.
So they get exposed as properties in the effect, and then can you parameterize those as well, where you're actually driving those with game parameters? Is that where it ends?
That's exactly. I'm just going to share the Wwise part.
Cool.
Share
Because what a great, you have this vision, and again, like the experience of a skipping CD player, frustrating in the moment, but as a sound-aware person, you're like, oh, that's what I need. I need this, this sound for the game. And then going deep, finding a way with tools that are out there to extend the functionality of Wwise and dig into it and come out with the goods. Like that's vision.
Well, it was that version that you just saw was obviously not like overnight. There was a lot of absolutely horrific versions of it that are thankfully long gone.
Yeah.
But
it's that part of the cooking show where it's like, and the cake is done. It's delicious.
Exactly. Yeah. I think it's important to mention that, just because, like, when I first started poking around at PD, coming from like no experience with it whatsoever, but I do have a fairly like reasonably technical background, so like it wasn't super intimidating to me, but there may be some people who get put off. I would just say don't, like, just keep trying it, play with it, have fun with it, accept that some of the experiments are going to go horribly wrong, but just kind of laugh it off and dive in again and try again, because yeah, that version of that effect was not version 1. That was version 20, 25, God knows. It took a few kicks at it. But yeah, here in Wise, you can see we have there's a bus called helmet speaker, so that's everything that comes into the helmet speaker, which is where we wanted this glitch effect to activate. And we have a bunch of EQs, and here's the stuck buffer effect instanced. I don't know if that is going to be... Okay, I will switch to show the editor for this. 1 second. Change windows. Editor. Okay. So there's
Cool.
the parameters. You can see everything. These are all the HV params that we exposed, and every single one of them is mapped to an RTPC. So we have the maximum buffer length, the minimum buffer length, the slew time, which is like the length of time it takes to drag the playback, to drag the end of the buffer in and out, essentially.
Yeah.
And then the rerand time, max and min. So like, how often do you want it to choose a new buffer length? And then how much dry signal do you want through? How much stock signal do you want through? And then the underscore stick is just like stop triggering.
Got it.
And yeah, all the RTPC curves for the various ones were all kind of like laid out very specifically. And these were just kind of tweaked by ear. Like we could have polished these and tweaked them again and again and again forever. You know, like I don't know if we necessarily had it set perfectly by the time it shipped, but it was working, and yeah, it did what we wanted to do. And like one of the core things which fitted the kind of overall aesthetic of the game was like, the idea was that nothing, like in the game, your equipment doesn't work properly. Like it's kind of hand-me-down 4th generation stuff that it's kind of flaky. So that was one of the kind of justifications for this, was this really helped that feeling of equipment malfunctioning, but in a cool way.
Right.
So it's that feeling of like, oh, that glitch, but I liked it. You know?
Yeah.
It brings that reality. Again, we've talked about time and again how many of these systems are focused on bringing that reality of the experience of the simulation into it.
Yes.
And like, surprise, in the future, shit still breaks. Like, sorry.
Yeah.
Like, we're not going to be living in a frictionless world. Like, this is still going to be part of an experience that someone has. So to bring that in real time and use the sound that's happening as part of that failure is a great touch.
Nice. I have a video. If you could put this video up.
Great.
This is kind of the effect in the final mix of the game. It's quite subtle. Depending on what type of event has triggered it, it can either be really loud or really quiet. Because if there's a massive resynthesized explosion that's gone through the speaker and it happens to snag the transient, it'll be a really loud kind of glitch sound.
Okay.
But if it just catches like a small bit of speech, it will be more subtle. So it's kind of, you roll the dice a little bit in terms of what impact it has.
Yeah.
And in fact, there was a point at which it was too often, it was grabbing too loud of a transient. So we delayed the triggering of the glitch, so it was like the major transients of explosions had passed by the time it grabbed the buffer.
Sure.
So it ended up, the final version of it is more subtle than it originally was when we had it. I
Right.
think when we shipped in early access, I think it could get really unpleasantly loud sometimes.
Yeah.
I think we softened it out, but yeah. Anyway, this video kind of shows it in the mix.
Okay, great.
Oh, am I not sharing it yet?
Just on
I'm not sharing anything. Okay, here we go.
legislation can put more emphasis on the fostering of collaborative the wake of ruthless corporate juggernauts.
Coffee cutting fee, 50,000 credits. Using a right-handed tool in your 600,000 credits.
Yeah.
Oh, that's fantastic.
Awesome.
So
yeah, I mean, there was with that. We don't necessarily need to dive into the other patch, but there was another effect we made, which was for the resynthesis process. Very similar kind of reasoning for that. We wanted it to sound kind of glitchy and screwed up. Like we if there was fire burning or like a hissing fuel pipe around you, and there was no air to hear it. We wanted, as I was saying earlier, we wanted to still be able to hear that, so the player knew there were hazards around them. So in game, we had some lore around it. There's a fictional piece of tech that resynthesizes the sounds so that you can hear them. Now, obviously, we could have just played the dry acoustic versions of the sounds, but we kind of wanted that equipment to feel flaky like everything else.
Yeah.
So we made another effect, which is kind of like a multi-effect essentially that glitched and stuttered and bleeped the sound that was coming through the buses, the relevant buses in Wise, in a very similar process. That had kind of like a kind of stepping sample and hold style stepping flanger, and it had a kind of a really aggressive down sampler with no anti-aliasing, so like really nasty kind of scratchy kind of sound.
Yeah.
And then it had a kind of like a little stutterer and a beep generator that would kind of like, again, just grab little micro buffers of sound and stutter them around.
Yeah.
So by the time all of those were combined, it had a really nice effect. You could blend in those different processes. So if you didn't want too much of the scratchy stuff, you could dial that back, and you could low pass filter it and that kind of stuff. So, but yeah.
Right, and this is on parts of the environment that were dangerous, and you're wanting to just add that extra piece of disintegration, really, around the experience.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, to make it just feel as worn out as like the tools would look. Like the tools that you're using kind of look like they've been, bashed up a lot and they're old. Like we wanted this to sound bashed up and old. So
yeah, and also to make sure we're hitting player feedback too, right? So that if there's a fire behind you, like it's a first-person game, you might not be able to notice it if you're in a non-pressurized space. So by having this, and having it be a lore-based reason for giving you good audio feedback to move out of the way of the fire, I guess.
Yeah, 100%. And it's kind of funny when we first rolled out resynthesis. There are a lot of people who play the game for the relaxation. They like the kind of cocoon-like feeling of being inside that suit and a very kind of muffled soundscape and very tactile. And in the game, we presented resynth as a player upgrade. So you can choose to activate the resynthesizer. Like you buy it. You essentially buy it with your payment from them. They give you kind of money to spend in the company store essentially.
Yeah.
And you can buy upgrades. So you can activate resynthesis. You can upgrade it so it sounds less glitchy. And we got some feedback from players saying that's cool and all. I really like that upgrade, but can I turn it off? Because I really like the cocoon. I really like that safe bubble. I want that. So they wanted to max out their upgrades, but they wanted to be able to say make it have that very soft cocoon-like experience. So we added an option slider for resynthesis. So if you want to turn it off, you can. So like it's your game. Like play it how you want.
Yeah, and people wanted the sim. They wanted to be there to be no sound in space. So.
Right, which is you give the people what they want, and you already had a slider for it. So
yeah, and look, cool. Obviously, Wise setting up a slider is 2 seconds work. You just add an RTPC.
No, our job is really hard.
That's the easy bit of the job.
Very difficult.
Well,
so yeah, super, and like you can't be too precious. I think even if you spent a lot of time doing this thing, if some players would rather not hear it, then fine. Like I want people to play the game. Like that's the most important thing. And if people are going, oh man, that game has this sound, it really annoys me, and I don't want to play the game anymore, then no, like let them modify it, let them tweak it. Because I'd rather if players then play the game for longer, there's a lot more sounds that they will then hear, even if they don't hear that one that they've turned down. So.
Right. And we have a long history in game audio of adding sliders in those scenarios, right? Games that people play for countless hours, giving control to the frequency of randomized music, or footstep volume is a classic in large scale RPGs, being able to tune that. Oh, if I'm going to spend my life in this MMO, like maybe I just don't want to hear my footsteps all the time, right? So I think making those affordances, because we recognize that this interactive medium is, it's unique, right? It's not just the mute button, right? There's other contexts. So then it's good to be listening.
Totally. And from a player accessibility point as well, that's really important, where some people might get triggered by certain sounds. Like I remember when we were in early access, there was somebody who reached out to me and they said, there's this big ship that comes by. It's called the Polaris, and there's an event in game where it like rockets over, and it's this big, again, you don't hear the ship, but you hear the presence, like you feel the ship, and when it's stopping, the force of it is so much that it's like rocking your suit. Anyway, there was this kind of like low, almost cave drone sound that was put in when it was coming by, and somebody reached out and said, "Oh, this is really stressing me out every time I hear this, and like I can't play the game. I don't know if anybody will hear this, but just letting you know." And then we fixed it in the next update, and I like followed up with them, and it's great that you can do that kind of thing, especially in early access.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's definitely one of the things that being out there with your development gives you, is those opportunities, to have those, to engage with people in that way and evolve for the better, usually, based on input. What a fantastic adventure we have been on today.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Oh, it's been an absolute pleasure at this end. I'm just aware that there's this game is just absolutely stuffed with systems.
Yeah.
So there's like 1,000 other things we could talk about. But
well, we've pointed folks at the blog for Hardspace Shipbreaker that you wrote, that unpacks some of the other systems that we haven't covered and goes into detail on some of the ones that you have. So that's out there for people. Of course, go play this game. Like, it is a fantastic experience. That embryonic piece is there, but also the skill-based or skill building that comes with that simulation, right? There's work to do. There's work to be done.
Yeah, totally. And there's a whole campaign. There's cast characters and the story and all this kind of stuff. So it's a fun time.
Cool. Well, thanks so much for bringing and sharing your knowledge with the Wwise community. It's so great to have your experience on display, watching you navigate through your project. It's a gift to be able to hear people unpack how they think about interactive audio, because it's so different for every project and for every person. So thank you for taking the time to dig deep and surface some of the really unique systemic pieces of this game.
Awesome. Well, absolute pleasure.
Yeah, thank you so much for having us.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. Cool. So this was Wwise Up on Air. If you enjoyed this, circle back next time. We'll continue to bring stories of developers to the community in order to, fuel your interactive audio experiences with Wwise. And again, thanks to the team at Blackbird Interactive for coming today. See you next time.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.
See ya.